Thomas Reed said, "The photograph looked ordinary until someone noticed the man standing at the center, staring down at something that should not exist in that moment." He walked across the dim archive room, the air thick with weight dust. As the image slowly sharpened on the table, he said, "What if the past is not locked behind us? What if moments can slip and fold when no one is watching? What if our own devices have shadows older than we think?" He leaned closer and breathed out a quiet tremor as the strange object in the man's hand reflected a soft gleam that did not belong to 1920. The room seemed to tighten around him, and he whispered that this photo felt less like a mistake and more like an invitation. Thomas Reed said, "When the photo first surfaced, most people thought it was a trick, but each expert who looked at it found something that pushed doubt aside." Marcus Vail examined the print under a bright lamp, marking places where the shadows behaved too cleanly for the technology of that era. Dr. Eleanor Shaw kept her arms crossed as she followed his notes, trying to hold on to reason. Julian Carr watched in silence, his expression tight as he studied the strange shape in the man's hand. Lena Moretti placed documents on the table, noting that nothing in the archives hinted at staged photography in that area. Their quiet reactions started to build a sense of pressure that none of them could explain away. Marcus Vail said, "There is something wrong with the reflections." He pointed to the small shimmer on the object, a gleam that behaved like polished glass. Thomas Reed leaned closer and felt a cold tension as the detail sharpened. Dr. Eleanor Shaw argued that early plastics could create similar effects, but the brightness looked too smooth, too clean, almost like the surface of a modern device. Lena Moretti slid forward a set of comparison photos, none of which matched the reflection pattern. Julian Carr whispered that geometry sometimes reveals truths people are not ready to see. The room grew heavier as silence stretched. Thomas Reed said, "If this shine is real, someone was holding something far ahead of its time." Dr. Eleanor Shaw tapped her finger on the table, trying to build a logical path as Marcus explained the angle of the reflection. Lena Moretti mentioned that none of the known materials from the 1920s behaved quite like what they were seeing. Julian Carr stepped forward and said it hinted at controlled surfaces that did not exist in that decade. Their voices lowered as the photo felt less like a relic and more like a warning that time was not as steady as they believed. The group gathered again as Marcus projected an enlarged scan on the archive wall. Thomas Reed said he could feel the weight of something that did not belong. Dr. Eleanor Shaw rubbed her forehead as she searched for anything rational. Lena Moretti pointed out that the man in the photo seemed strangely isolated from the rest of the street crowd, almost as if he were unaware of them. Julian Carr stepped closer and said that sometimes objects appear before their time when reality slips. Thomas felt a quiet jolt as he looked at the magnified device and sensed that their investigation had only just begun. Marcus Vail said, "The details become clearer when we magnify the negative instead of the print." He lifted a new scan onto the screen, the grain shifting into sharp patterns that made the strange object stand out like a dark spark. Dot Z. Thomas Reed leaned closer and sensed a strange pull, as if the device resisted belonging to its surroundings. Dr. Eleanor Shaw kept her tone calm, as she insisted that early cameras sometimes created accidental illusions, yet her eyes narrowed when the edges of the object formed an almost perfect rectangle. Lena Moretti compared it with dozens of period items, none sharing the same clean geometry. Julian Carr whispered that shape rarely lies, and the room quieted as the image grew more impossible. Thomas Reed said, "Look at the way his hand curls around it." Marcus nodded and marked the exact grip on the scan, showing the familiar hold people use for modern phones. Dr. Eleanor Shaw argued that compact cameras existed then, but the object lacked a lens and had proportions too thin for any device from that era. Lena Moretti brought forward a small box camera from the archive, holding it beside the projected scan, and everyone saw they looked nothing alike. Julian Carr muttered that the man's posture seemed strangely natural, as if he knew how to use whatever he held. The tension in the room grew heavier as details stopped supporting doubt. Marcus pointed at a new highlight near the top edge of the object and said it reflected light in a way consistent with polished metal. Thomas Reed felt his chest tighten, as the reflection seemed too modern. Dr. Eleanor Shaw tried explaining it away as a chemical streak from the film, yet the angle of the reflection shifted exactly as Marcus moved the image. Lena Moretti said that none of the other items in the street scene showed such smooth brightness. Julian Carr stood quietly until he finally said the object behaved like a device built many decades later. Their glances met in a silent moment of shared disbelief. Thomas Reed said the object's surfaces seemed too smooth and too uniform, almost like a mass-produced design. Marcus agreed and enlarged the edges further until the thin borders looked nearly identical to modern phone frames. Dr. Eleanor Shaw stepped back as if the image pushed her away, struggling to find any explanation rooted in the materials of that era. Lena Moretti pointed out that known 1920s devices showed rough, uneven textures, nothing like the clean lines displayed here. Julian Carr murmured that technology sometimes leaves traces before its time, and no one responded because the room felt suddenly colder. Marcus dimmed the lights and revealed an even deeper scan, showing the object's surface reacting to sunlight in a way far too controlled for 1920. Thomas Reed felt a strange wave of unease as the reflection formed a soft square pattern that looked like a locked screen. Dr. Eleanor Shaw whispered that the pattern made no sense for any early material. Lena Moretti said the crowd around the man did not seem to notice him, as if the moment carried an odd separation. Julian Carr leaned forward and said this was the kind of clue that suggested the past might not be a fixed timeline but something more fluid. The silence that followed was heavy and unreal. Lena Moretti said the photograph's location was easy to trace because the street in the background had been part of a small district known for early radio tests. Thomas Reed felt a chill when she explained that experimental antennas once stood only a few meters from where the unknown man appeared. Marcus Vale examined old maps and said the alignment of shadows matched that exact block, confirming the photo's authenticity. Dr. Eleanor Shaw studied the records and found no mention of staged photography or publicity events in that area. Julian Carr said places where signals once collided sometimes hold strange echoes in time. The team felt a quiet pressure growing as history seemed to bend around a single captured moment. Thomas Reed said the street once carried a constant buzz of early electrical activity, the kind that made radios crackle without warning. Marcus showed an old report describing sudden bursts of interference that no one could explain. Dr. Eleanor Shaw tried to anchor the discussion in known science, saying old equipment often produced random noise, yet her voice wavered when she saw notes describing synchronized pulses. Lena Moretti added that the week the photo was taken had several incidents of strange static storms. Julian Carr leaned in and said such disturbances sometimes mark places where different moments brush against each other. The room fell silent as they realized the environment itself was part of the mystery. Lena Moretti said something strange had emerged while she reviewed other photographs from the same roll. The unknown man did not appear in any of them, even though the street was crowded and the angles overlapped. Thomas Reed felt a creeping unease as she spread the images across the table. Marcus compared shadows and concluded the sequence was continuous, meaning the man should have appeared at least twice. Dr. Eleanor Shaw said his absence made no logical sense if he were truly part of the scene. Julian Carr whispered that sometimes a person caught in the wrong moment leaves only one trace. Their shared silence felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Thomas Reed said the man's posture looked disconnected from the surrounding crowd, almost as if he drifted through them without touching their world. Marcus zoomed into the edges where his figure met the street, noting a faint blur that none of the other subjects displayed. Dr. Eleanor Shaw argued a blur might come from motion, but the man's stance was perfectly still. Lena Moretti mentioned a diary entry from that area describing a passerby who moved strangely, as though not seeing the rest of us. Julian Carr leaned forward and said records like this often slip through time unnoticed until a moment forces them into meaning. The air felt thick with doubt and possibility. Marcus revealed a final detail from the enhanced files. The shadows around the unknown man seemed slightly misaligned from the rest of the crowd. Thomas Reed felt a wave of dread as he realized the light source matched perfectly for everyone, except him. Dr. Eleanor Shaw checked the angles 3 times before admitting the discrepancy made no physical sense. Lena Moretti said the shadow felt like a piece of another moment stitched into the street. Julian Carr lifted his head and said this kind of mismatch sometimes marks an event where time folds for an instant. The group stared at the image, aware they had crossed from odd coincidence into something far more unsettling. Prof. Thought. Julian Carr, said the photo, forced them to confront ideas most people avoid, and his calm voice filled the archive as he explained that moments in time sometimes behave less like a straight line and more like ripples overlapping. Without warning, Thomas Reed listened with unease while Marcus Vail displayed diagrams showing how the light around the unknown man resisted, matching the rest of the scene. Dr. Eleanor Shaw argued that physics depends on order, yet her voice softened as she admitted some events refuse simple rules. Lena Moretti said ancient journals often recorded brief distortions people never understood. The group felt a shift as familiar science began to loosen. Norson Street, Calico. Julian Carr said the object's reflective behavior matched something built with future materials, describing how controlled surfaces respond to sunlight in ways early metal never could. Thomas Reed felt the room tighten as Marcus highlighted the near-perfect symmetry of the device in the scan. Dr. Eleanor Shaw tried grounding the discussion by referencing optical tests, yet her tone carried uncertainty. Lena Moretti retrieved measurements from older lenses and showed they could not produce such clean reflections. Julian concluded that whoever built the object used technology far beyond the era. Everyone stood still as the idea settled. Marcus Vail, said the blur around the object, looked intentional rather than accidental, like a boundary where something interacted with the wrong conditions. Thomas Reed shivered as Julian Carr explained that certain theories describe moments slipping from one timeline to another with brief instability. Eleanor Shaw tried insisting the blur might come from film aging, but the smoothness contradicted her explanation. Lena Moretti added that artifacts from the same archive never showed similar distortion. Julian said this kind of edge appeared in simulations of temporal interference. The thought left them uneasy, as if the photo carried a quiet pulse of something alive. Julian Carr said some researchers believe time is not fixed but constantly rewritten by events that leave faint traces we cannot measure. Thomas Reed felt a strange weight in the air as Marcus displayed graphs showing impossible alignment between the object's shine and the sun's angle. Dr. Eleanor Shaw said she could not find any physical model from the era that fit the data. Lena Moretti stepped closer and said it was as if the object responded to light designed decades later. Julian told them moments like these were called temporal echoes, and the words settled across the room like a whisper. None of them felt ready for. Thomas Reed said it felt like the photo showed a moment caught between two realities, and Marcus nodded as he highlighted the impossible clarity of the device's edges. Dr. Eleanor Shaw stared at the image, her doubt unraveling as she admitted the evidence pushed beyond known science. Lena Moretti said early newspaper reports from that district mentioned sudden bursts of static that caused clocks to stop for seconds at a time. Julian Carr stepped forward and said such disturbances could signal a moment where time bent under pressure. Their thoughts aligned in a quiet understanding that the object might not belong to their world at all. Lena Moretti said she found testimony from a shopkeeper who described seeing a man holding a black slab while speaking into it, and Thomas Reed felt the atmosphere tighten as the words sank in. Marcus Vale examined the written statement and said the phrasing matched how people describe unfamiliar technology. Dr. Eleanor Shaw tried to challenge the account, but the description carried a precision that made her pause. Julian Carr added that witness memories often capture things the era itself cannot explain. As they read the lines again, everyone sensed that the witness had seen the same figure in the photo, long before anyone noticed the anomaly. Marcus Vale said the testimony mentioned the man stepping aside as if listening to something no one else heard. Thomas Reed imagined the scene and felt a strange pressure, as if the past were trying to speak. Dr. Eleanor Shaw noted that early radio receivers were bulky, making the described behavior impossible. Yet the witness clearly saw a thin object held to the ear. Lena Moretti added that the shopkeeper wrote the statement without any intention of mystery. Julian Carr said this kind of detail often appears when two timelines quietly intersect. The group studied the testimony again, aware that disbelief was losing its place. Lena Moretti said she uncovered a short article from the same week, reporting sudden static storms across the district, and Thomas Reed felt the pieces forming a pattern that refused to settle. Marcus noticed the article mentioned clocks pausing, something no known equipment could cause. Dr. Eleanor Shaw examined the faded text and whispered that the disturbances aligned with the moment the photograph was taken. Julian Carr explained that such disruptions sometimes arise when physical conditions bend under unseen forces. The group exchanged uneasy glances, aware that the street seemed to host more than ordinary history. Thomas Reed said the articles and testimonies felt like echoes of the same impossible moment repeating through different voices. Marcus Vale highlighted how the reported static matched interference seen in the enhanced scans. Dr. Eleanor Shaw slowly admitted the events stretched far beyond simple photographic error. Lena Moretti said the street might have experienced something brief yet powerful, leaving only scattered traces in paper and memory. Julian Carr said such patterns often point to a single cause, moving against the flow of time. Their voices faded into a heavy silence as the weight of the conclusion settled. Marcus said the strongest clue came from a short column, reporting a man seen speaking into a dark device before vanishing into the crowd. Thomas Reed felt a chill as he realized the observation matched both the testimony and the photo. Dr. Eleanor Shaw reread the column, unable to explain how multiple strangers described something far ahead of their time. Lena Moretti traced the timeline and found every report clustered within minutes of the photograph. Julian Carr said such alignment made coincidence almost impossible. The room grew quiet as they understood the event had not been isolated, but part of a larger disturbance. Marcus Vale said he completed the deepest scan yet, and Thomas Reed felt his breath catch as the new image filled the screen with a clarity that should not exist in a decades-old photograph. Dr. Eleanor Shaw stepped closer, her voice unsteady as she pointed to faint shapes on the surface of the object that resembled modern interface symbols. Lena Moretti whispered that no device from the era carried markings like these. Julian Carr said such details might appear when something foreign slips through time and leaves only fragments behind. The room felt charged, as if the past itself resisted being uncovered. Thomas Reed said the symbols looked too precise to be random grain. Marcus explained they formed patterns consistent with reflective surfaces used in modern screens. Dr. Eleanor Shaw tried to argue the shapes might be chemical noise, yet her voice softened as the forms repeated across different scans. Lena Moretti noted that the symbols aligned with the angle of the man's wrist, suggesting they belonged to the object and not the film. Julian Carr said such coherence often indicates the presence of design rather than accident. The tension grew heavier as the image pushed against logic. Marcus Vale said the surface of the object showed a layered structure almost identical to modern glass and metal designs. Thomas Reed felt the room grow still as this small detail threatened every expectation of history. Eleanor Shaw touched the edge of the projector frame and whispered that early materials were too rough to create such smooth transitions. Lena Moretti mentioned that several artifacts from that era showed coarse finishes that bore no resemblance to what they were seeing. Julian Carr said this kind of layered surface could only belong to a device shaped by knowledge from another time. The realization left them silent and shaken. Thomas Reed said the deeper they looked, the more the object resisted fitting into any known category. Marcus adjusted the lighting on the scan, revealing a faint glare that matched how modern screens catch sunlight. Dr. Eleanor Shaw tried to steady her thoughts as she admitted the brightness behaved too evenly for early materials. Lena Moretti explained that the surrounding crowd in the photo showed normal diffuse reflections, making the object even more out of place. Julian Carr said such divergence suggested the presence of something that slipped through an unstable moment. The air felt charged, as if the image carried a quiet vibration. Marcus Vale said the final enhancement revealed something none of them expected, a faint square pattern that looked like the outline of a screen waking under sunlight. Thomas Reed felt his chest tighten as the pattern pulsed faintly in the scan. Dr. Eleanor Shaw stared without speaking, her resistance falling away as she realized the object behaved like technology decades ahead of its time. Lena Moretti whispered that the street scene showed no reflection like it anywhere else. Julian Carr said this was the kind of clue that hinted at a moment when time fractured briefly, allowing something foreign to appear. Their silence carried the weight of a discovery they were not ready to accept. Thomas Reed said the discovery felt incomplete, until Lena Moretti revealed she found another envelope misfiled deep in the archives. Marcus Vale watched as she placed it on the table, the paper brittle and slightly warped. Dr. Eleanor Shaw leaned in with quiet tension as the seal broke and a second photograph slid out. Julian Carr said the timing felt too perfect, almost as if the archive had waited for them to be ready. The room grew still as they realized this new image might confirm everything they feared. Thomas felt a tight pull in his chest as the photograph's edges caught the light. Marcus Vale said the second photograph brought more questions than answers as he pinned it to the board. Thomas Reed stared at the image, his heartbeat rising as he saw the same man standing in a different part of the street. Dr. Eleanor Shaw whispered that the framing matched the first photo's time of day, proven by identical shadow angles. Lena Moretti pointed out that the man seemed positioned deliberately, as if he were aware of being captured. Julian Carr said this made the anomaly larger than a simple mistaken object. The room felt heavier as reality seemed to shift beneath them. Thomas Reed said the photograph carried something unsettling because the man looked straight toward the camera, and Marcus confirmed the gaze aligned perfectly. Dr. Eleanor Shaw frowned as she noted that no one else in the crowd reacted, as if unaware of the moment. Lena Moretti found the man's stance slightly shifted, as though he had moved after the first photo was taken. Julian Carr said the direct gaze suggested awareness that defied the era's photographic norms. The silence between the group felt charged with fear and awe as they faced the possibility that the man knew he was being seen across time. Marcus Vale said the second photograph confirmed something impossible because the man's outline showed none of the blur found earlier. Thomas Reed felt a strange coldness as Julian Carr explained that a stable outline could suggest the moment of capture aligned correctly in the second image. Dr. Eleanor Shaw ran her finger along the frame and whispered that this reduced the chance of photographic error. Lena Moretti pointed out details matching the first photo, from the coat fold to the device shape. The group sensed that the new image carried intention, not accident, and the thought made the air feel unsteady. Thomas Reed said the second image changed everything because it showed the man not as an accidental figure, but as someone aware of his presence in the frame. Marcus Vale confirmed the angle matched the first photo's timeline, meaning the man stood there only moments apart. Dr. Eleanor Shaw's voice trembled as she admitted no known explanation could contain all the evidence. Lena Moretti said the image felt like a message left for a future audience who would finally understand it. Julian Carr stepped forward and said the man might not be from their time at all, and the team's silence felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable.